years.
No, I think Mr. Trini makes an excellent point about the firefighters and the police officers. They are indeed part of this younger generation. But Richard Reeves, let me, in the moments we have left, have you and Senator McCain.
I just want to say one thing.
Please.
Your generation was misled. This has been building for a long time, and not just days or years. It's been building for practically since the Crusades. There was going to be a clash between the modernizers, secular modernizers like us, and old-line fundamentalist religions, so that kids should have been told, I think it was a failure of the generation ahead of them, that this was coming. You didn't have to be Machiavelli or Nostradamus to know that sooner or later the East and the West were going to confront each other again about this.
In fact, Richard, in your book on Richard Nixon, I think you suggest that President Nixon was fearful of this 30-some years ago, and a lot of his diplomacy was aimed at staving off what he regarded as an inevitable conflict of this sort.
Nixon thought, not that he talked about it in public, that inevitably there was going to be a conflict between the East and the West, and that the East would win, led by China, by Japan, and by India, that they would eventually defeat the West, and the job of Western leaders was to hold off that confrontation for as long as possible. Now we're seeing a bit of it.
Let me turn to Senator McCain with what I guess is the kind of question that's difficult to ask, but I think has to be. If, in fact, Richard Reeves is right, that there is now a kind of conflict looming of the most, no pun intended, fundamental sort between the modern world and fundamental radical fringe of Islam, is there a policy, is there a military strategy that can possibly deal with that? I mean, I can imagine the cleverest military strategy in the world, and yet the next generation will still dream of being suicide bombers because that's how they're raised. What do you do about that?
Well, first of all, I agree with you on the historical perspective. I believe the word assassin came from a group of individuals back in the 11th century that started this kind of willingness to sacrifice one's own lives. Look, I think there's a fundamental problem in the East, and that is where you have a terrible economy, terrible economic conditions and social conditions, and a total lack of any of the institutions of democracy, any kind of freedoms. That's the fertile breeding ground for this kind of activity and these kinds of organizations. I believe we must do everything in our power to bring these nations economically, culturally, and every other way up into the 21st, well, into the 19th and then the 20th and then the 21st century. Because without the kind of economic growth and furthering and fostering of democratic institutions, you're going to have a fertile breeding ground for these kinds of organizations, and I'm not sure you're ever going to eradicate them.
All right, thank you.
And I think you're going to have...
Go ahead, Richard.
You have more of that in terms of we've got to understand that we are running the world, we're making it our world, we are the conquerors, and like earlier conquerors, the Romans or the Turks or whatnot, we can't expect the people who we're changing and they feel oppressing, we can't have them love us at the same time. We feel that we're so generous, they're so lucky to have our technology. We're pushing them around, and you can't expect them to love us. We have to work out a hard deal where they get benefits from what we're doing and we get benefits from what they're doing.
All right,
they're hard-working, decent people, most of them.
That's going to have to be the last word, Richard. Thank you very much for joining us. Richard Reeves, historian in Washington. Senator John McCain from Phoenix, Arizona. I appreciate you staying with us this hour. And Andre Trini in Los Angeles, who is a member of a younger generation that's facing a world that I don't think any of us could possibly have imagined. Thank you all for being with us.
And through the magic of television, Jeff is here. You taped that earlier. First of all, let's talk about some of this. Don't you hate it when the 26-year-olds are that smart?
You know, I using lines that people used to use. I have ties older than him, but actually, I think Andrea made a really good point when we talk about this generation of instant gratification. The firefighters, the police officers, the rescue workers. Well, many of them are in their 20s.
Oh, you see, I mean, I was driving in today, and you see them. They're kids. That's not the right word. It's not fair to them. They're men
young men and young
women, but
and we often, we often forget, we often sort of associate a younger generation with, and it is frankly elitist. We assume it's yuppies and it's higher income and it's white collar work. You've got all these people all over the country before this who were doing heroic work, dangerous work, life-threatening work, and what we saw these last 4 days on the part of that element of the younger generation was as heroic as anything the greatest generation did. I mean, how many people made the same point as they were running out of those buildings? The firefighters and the cops were running in.
Often, it seems to me, when we tape programs, we finish them, we walk away, and we think, I wish I'd have said, I wish I'd thought. As you listened to it again, or as you walked away from it, was there something you wish you had thought or wish someone had said?
I think actually what Richard Reeves and Senator McCain were talking about at the end raises, I'm not sure I wish I had said that, but now I know what I want to, where we need to go in the days ahead. Yeah. What Richard Reeves was saying is basically, look, you can launch the most powerful and intelligent military operation, but in the long run, if there's a whole part of the world that feels that they have gotten nothing from modernity, from the Enlightenment, from all the things we think are good, what are you going to do about the generations to come? I mean, if it's true that some reports are that the radical groups are being besieged by young men who themselves want to be martyrs, that raises a question so profound and so disturbing that it has to be explored. Somebody has to start asking the question, what do you do about that? So it did at the end. We thought we were having a conversation about the younger, the next generation, where they go, and as sometimes happens, as you know, sort of toward the end, something gets put on the table, and you go, oh boy, we got to think about that one very hard.
That's how we get to tomorrow's program and tomorrow's program and tomorrow's program. Do you feel today more patriotic? You're a guy that loves, you love your country, you love politics, do you feel it more? Your soul?
I feel that everything is more serious. I cannot stop thinking of the utter inconsequentiality of so much of what was obsessing the news media 6 days ago, and was obsessing the country at large. I mean, so many things. I don't just mean the kind of stupid stories that we flog to death. A publicist gets in an auto accident in a trendy watering hole, and that's news. And Lord knows, we haven't heard much about a certain California congressman these last 5 days. But to realize that all the assumptions of a week ago of the kind of lives we were living. I've got a 19-year-old son. Did that ever occur to me that whatever he was going to face in this world, the prospect of somehow being either threatened with terror, or maybe being asked to...
What's your son saying,
Dave,
about all this? No, what's he saying?
Sorry. He's watching this, as is my older daughter, with, I think, a sense of almost being stunned. I mean, this is, all of us are, but for a younger generation, never mind doesn't remember World War II, doesn't remember Vietnam, hasn't lived through anything. The crisis that he's lived through was impeachment and Monica, which was at least as much farce as it was drama. And now I think, who wouldn't, if you were 19 or looking at the rest of your life and thinking it is going to be so profoundly different, perhaps, than I would have thought. So that's why, yes, I'm thinking, much more about the danger the country's in, but I'm also thinking of how much more consequential this is than anything I've ever lived through.
Of all of I've managed for the better part of a week to make a few personal observations of all of the things in this last week that have been unsettling beyond the obvious, the event itself. I've said to my daughter, who's watched me go to terrible places at various times, to Bosnia, to South Africa, to difficult stories, are you okay? Are you scared? And she's always answered no. And I asked her the other day, are you okay? Are you scared? And she said, I think so. I think so. And I worry about how I worry about how adults, frankly, but how kids are handling all of this. Anyway, I'm not sure how we got off on that, but I like when we sit around and talk anyway. So, okay. And you're going to sit around and talk for a while longer today, right?
So I'm told.
So
yes,
you're
at
told.
Midnight, we're going to field some calls from folks and see how see what they have to say and see how that goes for a while with Jack
We are
Cafferty's
indeed.
gonna-
That's what it says right here. That feels like a segue to me. If you have, thank you. I'll talk to you later. If you have some things you'd like to talk about, goodness knows we've been talking here for a long, long time. It's your turn, CNN hotline. That's the number 1-800-310-4CNN. And for those of you who, like me, hate when they do things like for CNN because you don't really know what the numbers are, it's 4266. We'll make it a little easier. Jack Cafferty and a host of others, including Jeff, at midnight Eastern Time, coming up. Go back to the excuse me, to the ground zero scene. We're going to try and see this fire truck coming out one more time. As we said, a number of fire vehicles were buried, and it just gives you a sense of how the work is coming. Look at the condition of that. I don't mean the dirt on it. Just look at it. But, you know, I suspect that those firemen and women, that was a big moment, a kind of victory. It's not like finding one of your guys, goodness knows, but look at that, how mangled that looks, being towed away. And I'm not sure if that's a live picture or tape. I gather that's tape. But just behind it, I saw a flag, or at least I thought I did, somebody walking with a flag, or perhaps driving with a flag, as they carry that out.
There is something at once so futile and so ennobling about these gestures of trying to put a flag in the midst of the rubble, trying to put a flag on a mangled truck. The story that was told at the funeral for the fire department chaplain, when the firefighters took his body and brought it into a church, to pay it its respects. These gestures seem at once so small compared to what happened, and yet they're so human that.
Nice, powerful picture of that. Back to the business. In this case, the business of business. Come Monday morning, for the first time in a week, the stock markets will open. The Amex, the NASDAQ, the New York Stock Exchange will open. They spent the day testing out all of the telecommunications, the computers, all of that really does make these stock exchanges work. Greg Clarkin has more on that.
The opening bell is expected to sound on Wall Street Monday morning, breaking the silence that has blanketed the New York Stock Exchange since Tuesday's terrorist attacks. Sitting just a few blocks east of what was the World Trade Center, the NYSE has been covered in ash, but the grime is now washed away, replaced by an American flag. After hours of testing its internal systems Saturday, Chairman Richard Grasso declared all systems go and vowed Monday's opening bell would be rich in symbolism.
To send a very important message to the criminals who so heinously attacked this country, that they've lost. The American way of life goes on, business recommences.
The NYSE sustained no major structural damage, and inside the more than 100-year-old building, technicians tested the systems linking brokerages to the exchange, and the results have been encouraging.
We are very pleased with the progress that all of the firms have made, particularly our major firms who account for the lion's share of the order flow here.
Uptown, the NASDAQ has run tests of its own and termed those results terrific. It too vows to begin trading Monday morning. As for the American Stock Exchange, it suffered damage to its building and will trade out of the NYSE. The exchange and the city of New York have worked to restore access to the financial district. Once there, employees will find even tighter security around the NYSE, and everything from counselors to deal with trauma to surgical masks to deal with dust will be readily available. Greg Clarkin, CNN Financial News, New York.
And on the subject of business, it's going to be a very long time indeed before the airlines are back in business, or at least back in good business. A couple of airlines announced today that they'll cut back, once they even get back to full service, they'll cut 20% of their flights. Continental's going to lay off a lot of people. A couple of airports did open today that had been closed. It didn't get open yesterday. Logan Airport in Boston opened up. Finally, there was an incident there. That's perhaps a little strong, but someone was arrested, taken off a plane because they thought he was acting suspiciously. It turned out to be nothing. Also, Newark Airport, one of the three metropolitan New York airports and a very busy airport, opened up today as well. Flights, not many of them, I suppose, or not nearly as many as normal flying out, but it was open. Kennedy and LaGuardia, about half capacity today. The other two major New York airports, 550 arrivals and departures So business is edging back to normal, but it's going to be a long